Hi everyone. I just want to make a little instructor introduction video here for the Knowledge, Responsibility, and Society course that is Philosophy 5665. And I want to just talk a little bit about my own background because I think that might help understand where I'm coming from in teaching a course like this. So my name is Bruce Jans. I've been at UCF since 2003 in the philosophy department here. I am Canadian American, I'm dual citizen, and before I came to UCF, I taught in Canada. My PhD is from the University of Waterloo, which is just outside of Toronto, and I taught for a number of years at what is now the Augustana campus of the University of Alberta, so that's in Alberta, Canada. When I taught there, it was actually an independent institution, but it became part of U of A. I've always taught in philosophy departments. I, however, came to UCF as a professor of humanities, and that's, I think, significant. It's significant because even though my training is in philosophy, the kind of philosophy I've done has always been at the edges of philosophy and other disciplines, everything else that I can find. And for me, the most interesting philosophical questions happen when philosophy is in conversation with other disciplines and also other kind of forms of knowledge, even outside of the university. So even though my training is in history of philosophy, to some extent philosophy of religion, certainly what philosophers call continental philosophy, but also analytic philosophy. I feel comfortable in both of those areas, and if those don't mean anything to you, no worries, it's not that important. What I've done, especially since coming to UCF here, has been really much more about reaching out to other areas, which not only puts philosophy in conversation, but also I think clarifies the place of philosophy in the academy and in the world. So a couple of examples of that. One of my major areas of work and of interest is on questions or concepts of place and space across many disciplines. Philosophers have for a very long time thought about the concepts of place and space as concepts. What they've not done very much is think about their own place, think about themselves as having a place, or as that place as mattering in any significant way. Philosophy tends to kind of very quickly rise to the level of the universals. So when we talk about truth, it's a capital T truth that presumably doesn't have any source, doesn't have any commitments to anything. It's just a kind of abstract thing floating in the clouds. I have always been of the conviction that all of our concepts come from somewhere, and that it's possible for us as philosophers to think about those places and to think about how those places inflect those concepts and color those concepts and not give up being philosophers, right? I mean, for some people, as soon as you start thinking about that sort of thing, now you're automatically doing something like history or literature or politics or sociology or some other discipline. And I think it's possible to be a philosopher and yet to think about our own place in the world, okay? So what that's led me to do is a lot of different study on many different kinds of questions of place. I've looked at, our place in the natural world, so I've written about environmental questions. I've looked at our place in the digital world, and I've kind of fairly extensively gone into that because I'm a part of the Text and Technology PhD program here at UCF, which very much focuses on the digital. And I'm also co-director of the Center for Humanities and Digital Research. And so I'm very interested in the questions of place around the digital. We often think about the digital as obliterating place, as place is no longer an issue because we can be connected to everyone. I think that's a little bit simplistic way to look at it, and so it's, I think, much more interesting than that. So I've been interested in place in those terms as well. I've written about architecture, I've written in sociology, I've written in a variety of different areas, all of which are concerned about place. One of my own areas has been to focus on African philosophy. And I've spent a fair bit of time in Africa. I taught at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. I've taught in South Africa at Rhodes University. I've lectured around the country. I was in Rwanda shortly after the genocide. So I was there in 1997. The genocide was 1994. So I've been in a number of places in Africa, and what interests me there is the question of how you speak from a place. Okay, here we have this term, African philosophy, which has embedded within it a place, and this term philosophy, which we often think has no place attached to it. So how is it possible to say there's a philosophy from this place, yet it's still philosophy? Well, as you can see, or as you can imagine, that really fits nicely into a lot of my concerns. So I've done a fair bit of work in thinking through the history, both the kind of long-term history going back thousands of years, and also the more recent history of African philosophy. Africa is a place that has both had its own place taken from it through colonialism, and Africans have been taken from their place through slavery. Some of that alienation from place has been codified into law through things like apartheid and other kind of state structures. And so all of this is really significant and tragic as well, but important for us to think through how one can live in a place. How can one claim a place? How can one miss a place? How can one build a place? How can we yearn for one? How can we imagine a future place or a past place? Or any of these sorts of things. How can places be gendered? How can they be racialized? How does that matter to place? So there are all sorts of different angles that we have to come to this question of place. I've also been interested in, if you wish, the edges of place. Like what happens when we are in places which we have no past experience. And so I was on a project which we affectionately call our Astronauts Project, called Space, Science and Spirituality. And in that project, we looked at the experience of astronauts while in orbit. Many astronauts write diaries, and some of those diaries focus on non-operational issues. Like they look out a window and they will say anything from, that's kind of cool, all the way up to, this is mind-blowing. And so we were really interested in the kinds of experiences of awe and wonder that astronauts had while experiencing that space, which very, very few humans have ever actually experienced. And for most of us, certainly for me, my sense of that place is strongly mediated by movies and television and artists' creations or filmmakers' creations of that, not by being there. And so we were very interested in the question of, could we recreate some sense of that awe and wonder down here on Earth? Obviously, it's a limited sort of enterprise. We can't duplicate, launch thrust. We can't duplicate weightlessness. We can't duplicate lots of things. But nonetheless, we ran tests. We had people wired up using FNIR and any number of biometric scans. We had a battery of tests, of psychological tests and phenomenological discussions, and I think we did find that we were able to get people to similar kinds of experiences that the astronauts report. Now, this is important because if we are looking towards space flight, we are looking towards not just how the body interacts, but how we as humans interact with that experience. And so it's important to think about place and placelessness up there. So that's all my background. I have always reached out to other disciplines, and I think that's really important. And I think for the purposes of this course, it's especially important. In this course, in a course called Knowledge, Responsibility, and Society, what we're doing is thinking about ethics in context, right? Not simply as an abstract enterprise. We're not going to be talking about, trolley problems and abstractions like that. We're going to be asking, what does ethics look like in the institutions we have today, with the level of knowledge we have today? And so, bureaucracies are going to be important. Scientific knowledge is going to be important. Politics. All of these things come to matter to think about, what does ethics really look like in the real world? And so for me, that's really, really interesting and exciting. And it fits really kind of hand in glove, I think, with a lot of the stuff I've been talking about for my own background. And so I'm really happy to be teaching this course. I'm happy to have all of you along as well, and I'm looking forward to some great discussions throughout this. And so welcome to the class.